Welcome to the comprehensive DDD guide. In this 10-part series, I will explain everything you need to know to start off and become an excellent DDD player and unleash the power of capitalism with our corporate demons.
Part 9. Deck Building Theory. In the last part, we have learned how to use the hidden abilities of our DDDs and DDs. And in this video, I will show you how to build your own spicy DDD deck according to your playstyle and your taste, depending on the metagame that you are playing against on your local or regional or national or whatever level. Now, let's get into it. First off, the correct main deck ratio. As of its current date, our deck plays a lot of one-offs, meaning that we usually don't want to strive for 40 cards because that would mean that we increase our chances to draw one of these one-offs. That would be suboptimal, so to distill that, we want to have at around 42 to 44 cards, sometimes even exceeding that number so that we don't have to draw these cards in our opening hand. So our main deck is divided into three parts. We have the engine boosters, and the non-engine. Our engine is super big. It has around 22 to 26 cards, depending on whether you want to keep the garnets for the one-card combos or not. Our engine boosters are around 3 to 5 cards even. And our non-engine is on the smaller side, so between 10 to 12 cards. Okay, here you can see the standard DDD deck core. And as you can see, the standard deck core consists of 26 main deck cards and 12 extra deck cards. And I'm talking about the extra deck cards in shortly, so don't worry. Oh, and I will give you some tips on siding in the correct non-engine as well. But the standard is not always the best case to do, right? So you may consider to put in some spicy main deck tech cards to suit your personal playstyle. And we start off with the main deck monsters. First, Vice Typhon. Vice Typhon is considered a main deck staple for many DDD players. And I don't even disagree, because he's a very nice extender or a big Genghis Turbo, since you only need to foolish him with Copper or Tell to the grave so that your big Genghis play is live. It's basically a Necro Slime, but just better. However, you have to be careful because Vice Typhon's Graveyard Fuse effect can only be used on the same turn that it got foolish. As a side note, it's very funny to use Vice Typhon with, for example, an Effect Veiler to go into your Siegfried. Next one is our other doggo, DD Dog, literally called Dog. He's our searchable extra deck imperm, except for Link sadly. As a pen scale, it can negate Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monsters by popping itself for cost. On the field, it's a Fusion Synchro and Xyz negator as well. And it can even negate the attack of that monster too. This may come in super handy. Oh, and did I mention that it is level 6? Meaning if you would lose one of your small Genghis, you can still go into your big Caesar by using your dog as overlay material. It's exceptionally good, especially if you go up against a bestial player who decides to banish your Necro Slime before you could use it for its fuse effect. Moving on to Vice King Requiem. Vice King Requiem is very nice for extension. He pops one of our contracts as cost to special himself from the pen skill to the field. And since Requiem is level 8, you can use him for overlaying into a rank 8. Oh, and did I mention that if you use him as material for your extra deck DDDs, that extra deck DDD will gain an additional effect to pop one card on the field by shuffling one of our contracts back from the grave to the deck and gaining 1000 life points. This is a super good tech card to play into time. However, you have to keep in mind that after you have specialed him out by destroying one of your contracts, you are then locked into DDDs, meaning that you can't special your Griffin out anymore, for example. Lastly, the Tower out. Since we have a very hard time to deal against towers, we have an in-archetype tech monster to go against them. Laplace is very easy to summon. You only have to tribute one of your DDDs on the field so that you can special him out from the hand. With Laplace on the field, now it gets interesting. Laplace has an inherent one-time battle protection each turn, and you will never get battle damage with this card. But how do we win with this card against towers? Well, there's a reason for the question mark right next to his attack points. Before damage calculation, when this card battles an opponent's monster, it actually doubles its attack points by the base attack of that currently battled monster. Meaning, if your opponent decides to swing in with a fat 7000 base attack monster, Laplace will gain 14,000 attack points before damage calculation. Oh, and did I mention, Laplace inflicts piercing damage as well. So if your opponent decides to be slick with it, you can just hit him with a defense position monster too. This turns out to be a very scary OTK machine sometimes too, depending on the matchup. However, you have to be cautious. Laplace's double attack gain only works on monsters that have an innate base attack, which is huge. Monsters that gain more attack by effect won't be affected by that. So don't use Laplace on a Nibiru token. Moving on to our engine boosters. So how would you decide on any of these? Let me help you, because none of these are created equal. First is Piri Rice. Never use that, please. This should be only seen as a last-ditch effort to increase the consistency of your deck, because otherwise this card is very bad, trust me. It can search out any monster in your deck with an attack of 0, but you have to pay half of your life points to do that. And topping it all off, you have to normal summon that monster right away, because if you don't, its effect gets negated this turn. So this card is super telegraphed, because you have to normal summon your searched monster right away, and if you don't, its effect gets negated. And then you're a sitting duck with half of your life points and a wasted normal summon. So only play it if you have nothing else left, please. Next one, it's a small world we live in. Small world is a very good consistency booster. By using a bridge, you can go and search for any of your DD monsters to your liking. If you use Archfleet Eccentric as a bridge, you can access any DD monsters that you can dream of in your main deck. And if you use Ash, if you play her as a hand trap of course, you can access Kepler, Copper and Rage, which are still great things to search for. Well, yes, you go -1 for that search, but at least you didn't lose half of your life points and are sitting duck because your opponent Ash Blossom your normal summon Kepler or Copper without follow-up. Next one is 1 for 1. I would go as far as to say that 1 for 1 is a mandatory card in our deck. Well, yes, you could argue you go -1 with this card as well, but at least you go and pitch it to the graveyard for 1, and it specials out a monster directly from your deck too, meaning you didn't waste a normal summon with it. So in the right circumstance, if you have the right monster in hand, you can actually extend your plays with this card too. So if you didn't open up with Griffin, it's still not a lost cause if you open up with 1 for 1. Lastly, Nightmare Throne. Nightmare Throne is the best card that you could use as an engine booster. This card is basically Piri Rice, but without any downsides. By using Nightmare Throne, you can search for Kepler, Copper, or Rage, or like any monster that has 0 attack and defense, and either destroy it or get it to your hand. This is fantastic. You don't go -1, you get the search, and you don't have to normal summon it right away and pay half your life points to do it. This should be an instant 3-off in any DDD deck if you have access to it, because it's quite pricey in real life and on Master Duel as well. Moving on to our spicy main deck spell and trap tech. First off is Terraforming. Terraforming is only good to use if you use Nightmare Throne, because with Terraforming you then have potentially 4 Nightmare Thrones, because this Terraforming serves as Field Spell Searcher too. Or another target would be Pattern License if you have Nightmare Throne in hand, for example, and you go plus with that, so that's great. Sadly, it is banned on Master Duel though, so you can only use it in the TCG. Next up is Set Rotation. Sadly, this card is currently banned in Master Duel as well, so the only option to play it is when you play it in the TCG and with Nightmare Throne. So I want you to see it like this, okay? So let's imagine you would use Terraforming, but instead you decided to side in Set Rotation, for example. Set Rotation is more or less an upgraded version of Terraforming, because it has a nifty side effect that terraforming doesn't have. What set rotation does is that it sets 2 field spell cards from your deck, 1 to your opponent's side of the field and 1 for your own side of the field. And now here's the kicker. If the opponent had a field spell previously, this field spell will get sent to the graveyard because the new field spell that you gave him will get set there. And because of set rotation's second effect, your opponent isn't permitted to set a new field spell as long as 1 field spell is set to. So use that to your advantage. Oh, and did I mention that it's a quick spell too? So I can actually activate it on his turn. So when he thinks that he can set or activate a field spell, I would just chain onto it with my set rotation, and then he can't access my field spells or his field spell zones altogether. Oh, and another thing is, you can use set rotation to protect yourselves from imperms and evenly matches, because you give your opponent another card, and your opponent now controls a card, so no activation from hand now. Next is our in-archetype D barrier at home. Dark Context with the Eternal Darkness is one of our strongest floodgates. Sadly, it gets a lot of hate or flack in the DDD community because it's deemed not as useful, but in my opinion, it's still a very strong floodgate in certain matchups or in certain locals or regionals, depending on the decks that are prevalent. What this card does is the following. If you have 2 pen scales live, this card will be live as well. It becomes target protection for every monster card on the field, and that means your opponent cannot target your monsters for imperms, but in turn he cannot use equip spells that target to his monsters too. Now to the real floodgate effect. Your opponent is not allowed to use any monsters on the field for tribute summoning, fusion summoning, synchro summoning, and Xyz summoning. Depending on the matchup, this card, when it is live, will shut down everything that your opponent might throw at you, aside from board breakers. It makes your board sphere mode proof, and it hinders your opponent from playing the game altogether. Any competent Xyz deck will just fold instantly with this card online. The next one is our Royal Decree at home, and it's called Dark Contract with Errors. This card negates every trap on the field each turn. So if your opponent decides to set another trap in its next turn, on your follow-up turn, you can negate that as well. If this card is live against a trap deck, it's basically most likely an auto win for you. So bye bye Paleozoic, I don't care about your traps, we can just shut them down. Now let's move on to the card extra deck ratio. Different than in the main deck, in the extra deck we divide it in 2 categories. First, the mandatory slots. Mandatory slots are combo pieces for DDDs that are used for every essential combo. For example, 1 card combos, 2 card combos, and 3 card combos. Lastly, we have 3 flex slots. These slots can be filled with out-of-archetype monsters such as Zeus, or in-archetype monsters that suit your playstyle, for example Caesar Ragnarok. Since the mandatory slots are usually constant, we now look into the flex slots. First up is our fusion lineup. We have Oracle King Dark, Purple Armor, and Caesar Ragnarok. If you have watched all of my other guide parts, you have seen them all at least once. To recap, Oracle King Dark is used to turn every effect damage into life points. Purple Armor is usually used as an OTK enabler to burn your opponent by half of the attack of his monster, and Caesar Ragnarok is an OTK enabler for boards that flood you. Not with floodgates, but with big monsters. Next is the Synchro lineup. Here we have 2 other Synchro monsters that you might want to look into depending on your playstyle. One Synchro that you know already is our Angry Ice Cream Cone, Bright Armor. He's a target protector, a skill drain on legs, and it has a Finding Pan skill effect as well. That if you have a Synchro DD monster that gets attacked by a monster from your opponent, you can activate Bright Armor's effect to basically Raigeki your opponent's monster and burn him for each monster that gets destroyed by that effect. Then we have High King Alexander. It's more of a niche card because it's not that great. However, it is the monster that hits the hardest in our DDD deck. If you control 3 DDDs in total, Hike Alexander will gain 3000 attack on top of his 3000, meaning he has 6000 attack now. It's an insane meter. And he has the same effect as Big Genghis, meaning if you normal or special summon another DD monster, he can reborn one from the grave too. Now to a Master Duel only pick, Baronne. You guys know Baronne all too well. She is the Omni Negate for level 10 Synchros, and we can access her via our 3-card combos. That's why she's here. So if your bannerlist allows it, you may run her. And then we have an out of archetype contender, Chaos Angel. Now, Chaos Angel is a special case, because he's bad to use if you don't have a Fiendsmith engine. But since it came out recently in the TCG, it's great. Chaos Angel becomes one of the most insane synchro plays that you could do with DDDs. Since Fiendsmith Engraver is a light fiend level 6 monster, you can use any level 4 DD to go into your Chaos Angel. And then your Chaos Angel becomes a tower, your synchro monsters become a tower as well, and you can banish any card on the field. Awesome. Lastly, the Xyz lineup. If you have seen the last parts, you already know these 3 guys. Kali Yuga is our field negate, Dark Armor our recycle and pop, and Zeus our board wipe. The only one that you don't know of is the Star Slayer Typhon. Typhon is a great floodgate against monsters that have more than 3000 attack, and it can help you to survive another turn if you get Ash on your 1-card combo and don't have any follow-up anymore. So consider playing him if you think the meta is calling it right now. Now, after we have finished the extra deck, now we go into the side decking if you play the TCG. The correct side deck ratio looks like this. We have 15 cards obviously, and you can decide to play anything you want basically. Depending on the meta that you have to face in your local, regional, national or whatever area, you can go into a hand trap or a board breaker heavy approach plus additional DDD cards. People could play 0 to 3 DDD cards in the side deck, 0 to 15 cards for the hand traps, or 0 to 15 board breakers. What I don't recommend is to mix between hand traps and board breakers. You have to decide whether your deck is more suitable for hand trap or board breaker heavy approaches. Never mix them. Because if you mix them, the hands may get worse. Because one hand trap is usually not enough, and one board breaker is usually not enough as well. You at least need 2 of each. So let's say you want to create your own side deck. How would you go about this? Well, just like the going second guide, we have to look into our opponent. Basically, what does the enemy play? But this time we don't have 4 categories, we have 3. Combo decks, Backrow decks, and cringe stun decks. First off, combo decks. Okay, now let's differentiate between the hand trap approach and the board breaker approach, and begin with the hand trap approach. For hand trapping, you have to ask yourself what kind of characteristic is the most prevalent in this deck. There are 3 main characteristics, I would say. The first kind would be the on-field effect kind. This is a combo deck which relies on field effects that must be resolved. This would be the case with Snake Eyes, for example, which is why targeting spot negates are the best. For example, Imperm, Veilers, Mourners, you name it. The next characteristic is the drawing effects. There are combo decks that really enjoy to draw as many cards as possible to combo off even further. The most classic example for that would be Dark World, or Infernoble, or Ignister. To really hit them where it hurts, you have to hand trap with an Ash or a Droll. Droll would typically be a game over for them. So as long as you have anti-draw hand traps, everything is good. Now to the last kind, these would be the graveyard effects. You know them already. Typically, the graveyard effect decks really enjoy to mill everything into the graveyard so that they can trigger their combo chains, right? The typical example for that would be Telements. Another one would be Lightsworn, but there are many more. So to hand trap them properly, you have to side in Graveyard Hate, which is Skullmeister, DD Crows, Bestials, and many more. Basically everything that shuts down their graveyard or their graveyard effects. But you have to keep in mind that decks will be a hybrid of some sorts. So it is most likely a combination of all of these three characteristics somehow. That's why it's important to identify the most dominant characteristic that is essential to the strategy of that deck. Okay, moving on to the board breaker weaknesses for the combo decks. Here there are three characteristics as well, but they're somehow different. They actually relate to the end board that the combo deck results in. You can either have a mass negate board, a floodgate board, or a tower board, and you have to decide which one it is. So let's say you know the combo deck is ending on a negate board, or like a very degenerate negate board. How would you deal with this? And this could be the case if you face super heavy samurai, for example. You would want to side in mass negates as board breakers, so a Dark Ruler no more or a drop that really hits hard, especially because the opponent can't really respond to it. The next end board type would be a floodgate board. I don't know if it's just me, but the combo decks that generate all these floodgates typically are super weak against your really classical board breakers, meaning that they typically lack a spell trap protection that results in getting Darkhold or Raigeki. So basically, these cards are their arch nemesis. A typical floodgate board would be Heroes, for example, or Kashtira, and both of them just instantly fold against Darkhold and Raigeki, the good old basic. Then there's the last type of end board. That one is super rare though. It's a tower end board, so their main strategy is generating a huge monster that is unaffected. And you have to try to out it somehow because it has a big attack and has usually a very nasty effect going alongside with it. But they're super weak against a very simple game mechanic, which is tributing. So if your opponent decides to end on a tower board, you better have that lava golem and kaiju ready, because that will create very insane emotional damage to them, because usually these kind of monsters are super hard to combo into. On this note, shoutouts go to all my Raid Retro enjoyers, especially when they get Kaiju or Lava Golem. That would be insane emotional damage. I'm sorry for you. Now, moving on to the next deck type, Backrow decks and their weaknesses. It's very suitable that we have talked about board breakers already, because Backrow decks are super weak against Backrow hate. And with Backrow hate, I mean board breakers that are super nasty against spell and traps in general. So let's say you face against Slab or Paleozoic or everything else that likes to have a 5 set and pass or something. Oh boy, let me tell you, if you have this Feather Duster, Lightning Storm or Cosmic Cyclone in hand, or like 2 of them, they are cooked. So if your tournament consists of a lot of Backrow decks, right, you better side in a lot of Backrow hate, because they will surely hate it as well. Lastly, we have Stun, as always. Stun is a weird one because it consists of a mix between heavy Backrow and has annoying normal summoned monsters too. So usually your best bet would be to have a mix of both kind of board breakers, meaning mass destruction as well as Backrow hate. Because typically if their normal summoned monster goes, their game plan goes as well. Lastly, let me introduce you the usual side decking pattern. So let's say you play a match with 3 duels to decide who's winner and loser, right? In the case of when you go first to the next round where you go second, you maybe want to take out your pattern license and your headhunt, and for 90% of the time your Ash Blossom as well, so that you make room for the correct non-engine to put into your deck so that you can draw the out. You maybe want to consider taking out Headhunt and Pattern License if you know that you can OTK your opponent for certain with the help of the non-engine that you side in. 90% of the time Ash Blossom is sided out as well, because, well, it is great in a lot of senses because it hits in a broad way a lot of decks, but it's not the best in a specific type of matchup. You know what I mean? Next is when you go second to first. If you go first after you have gone second, You will want to side out every board breaker non-engine that you have currently in your deck. And with that space, you want to side in your headhunt and your patent license again to go into your full combos for your first turn boards. Lastly, if you go into time, you want to put in all these time cards that you have. Meaning, if you have all these OTK enablers in your extra deck, for example, you might want to consider siding in your Dark and your Purple Armageddon. And from your main deck perspective, you want to side out every hand trap that doesn't increase your life points basically and put in Dogwood. Here you can see an example deck list of my DDD deck from season 32 of Master Duel. Since there were a lot of decks that were graveyard reliant, I decided to throw in Skullmice at 3, and it worked. This goes to show you that there are a lot of possibilities on how we could build our deck so that it suits our way of thinking and our way of playing. So no matter what other people tell you, just try it out for yourself and see if it works out for you. That's the most important thing. Okay, that was it. Congratulations, Senior Manager. You have learned everything I could teach you in this virtual plane that we are living in. But in case you want to explore the real world, I will show you how to play our deck in the TCG, because there are some things that Master Duel automatically does, but you have to learn in the real world first. So turn off your PC, grab your deck, and wreak havoc in your locals, regionals, or nationals. I will show you all the necessary tricks you need to win with our deck in real life. Next time in the DDD guide. Go from Master Duel to the TCG.